Hello, I'm Jade Irwin, and this is my dad and my mom, and they are going to be my guests for this assignment. And the film that I chose was The 13th. So, first, I want to ask you guys a general question of what was your take on the film and how did it make you guys feel?
Take on the film was it was very informative. This is a very sensitive topic when we're discussing, humans and how we're pointed out based on the color of our skin. Well, everybody takes that sensitive. And if we look at the history, blacks were brought in, the black people were brought in as slaves, which is, in my opinion, not right. You can't pay somebody to force them to do work for you that they don't want to do. And unfortunately, that's the only opportunity that the black people were given when they were come over to this country. So that built upon hatred. And all that hatred was demeaning to them. So you see it throughout history. Black women as slaves were raped by white men. And that is so wrong in many ways. Black men did petty thefts just to survive, like small drug dealing, got put away in prison for way too many years. You start looking into the 1950s, you lead on to the early 60s, white-only signs bathrooms, white-only signs drinking fountains. If black people rode on a bus with white people, which was very uncommon, they had to sit in the very back on one side, and there actually had to be space. But usually that was very uncommon. White people got to ride their own bus. When black people started to dress to appeal in a man's suit that mix in with the white people, they were getting shoved and kicked on the streets, which is wrong. They were being treated like animals. And that is pointed out in your documentary. So we need to change now drastically, and all these people need to be looked upon a different way, and they need to be treated equally like everybody else. That's my take.
Okay, so I like how you went on talking about racism back then, about how the African American group was treated, but how do you think the racism was transformed today? Is it through criminalization?
Yes,
right?
there is criminalization, and it's done upon a lot of black people. You see that as a percentage.
Yes.
For instance, racial profiling, I guess we could say it that way. The black man is in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's driving into the car. He gets pulled over and singled out. Next thing you know, the cop calls for backup. Here comes another cop. Well, they do that as an intimidation process. Of course, who wouldn't be scared and nervous? So maybe he gets tense, but he doesn't have a weapon, but he's tense. Hands are up. A lot of these guys are getting shot. They're getting killed because of that, which is wrong.
I agree. It's wrong. And what was your take on the film?
I think it was an amazing documentary that has definitely informed and decoded the past in today's society of racism and racial injustice. And I think this film definitely has opened up people's minds and definitely will raise a lot of controversial questions about this topic.
For sure, lots of controversial questions. And I just want to point out, isn't it crazy to think that now there's over 2 million people incarcerated in America? And a big percentage of that is African American people. And that is the main topic of this discussion is, why is that so? Well, it first started with loopholes towards the 13th Amendment. And I think that's also why this documentary is called The 13th. So what loopholes do you think were brought by the 13th Amendment?
Well, for one thing, the 13th Amendment is the abolishment of slavery,
right.
Okay? The loopholes, as you see in that film, in the early part of the film, is the black men were not free.
They really weren't free.
They were classified as free in a document. But as you see, the black men, right in the beginning, When slavery was abolished, what happened? They were already being thrown into prisons, work camp prisons, to rebuild the South from the Civil War. The Civil War destroyed a lot of the South, so they still found ways in the 13th Amendment to use loopholes to get these black people back into prison to do all this work to rebuild the white towns, which is wrong. Everybody should do the equal work, and that's a free man.
Yeah. What was said to be a free man really wasn't a free man. It was really just, they were still slaves in a way,
Right.
but labeled free. And the loopholes, I believe, is really what started this criminalization of a black person, a colored person. So, Mom, what was your take on the loopholes that were brought in the 13th Amendment from when it came and to modern day America today?
There are three forms of loopholes. First of all, it's the lynching, and second one is the separation in the 50s, making African Americans second class. And the third one is a new form of mass incarceration.
I agree. I think one that we just forget about is segregation. They said segregation was still equal, but it wasn't.
No.
Even though you were separated, it was not equal because there would be signs saying white people only. That's not equal. The African American people still got treated like slaves in a way. So I think segregation is something that brought a lot of this racially motivated ulterior to different people. What do you think?
I agree with you 100%. Segregation will never work. You see that in history, like you said, from the 50s, coming into the early 60s was the worst part of it. They actually, I think it was about 8 or 10 years ago, tried to get that back into a political class. Let's revisit segregation in some of these schools again. Thank God they didn't. They were trying to resegregate schools for blacks and whites. If you want to move on in a society and have people get along, like you said, you have to have more cultures start moving in with each other. Agreed? And we all try to get along. We appreciate each other's cultures.
Yeah, of course. So segregation, I think, was one of the biggest things that really split us up after the creation of the 13th Amendment, because it didn't give us a way to integrate with each other.
Right.
And it really just gave us a way to keep being racist. And it's really just sad to see that that was even implemented, and it really is dehumanizing. So I would like to discuss, for a first point, I would like to discuss how the African American group is criminalized today. How do you think they're criminalized?
Well, a lot of the factors there, we could say one simple statement: wrong place, wrong time. If you're a black person in this society right now and you're out driving, you got to be careful where you drive. Isn't that kind of sad?
Yes.
How would
That's
you
true.
feel if you would feel like somebody's watching over your shoulder? When a black person gets pulled over, they automatically get nervous because you see history on TV right now, hands up, right? Is that the big saying, hands up? Why do you think they say that? Why do they say hands up?
Because they believe they're carrying something.
Well, they don't want to be shot,
Yeah.
because all these black people are getting shot and killed for the incorrect reason. They're not, half of them aren't even carrying it. More than half of them, I should say, don't even have a weapon on them. Just because they dress a certain way, just because a certain maybe demeanor or look, the cop thinks they're a bad person. Okay?
Yeah.
You mistaken their culture.
And that is a part of the criminal identity that a lot of black people carry today.
Right.
It could be where they live. I'm not just talking about the color of their skin. Where they live, how they're dressed, what people they surround themselves with. Not regards to the color of their skin. I think those factors also have a big impact on how cops treat them, and also how other people criminalize them. And that is just very biased and very wrong, because you
Right.
can't judge people off of exterior factors,
Right.
and obviously most importantly the color of your skin.
Right.
So also another fact is 1 out of 3 black male are going to be arrested, and that is statistics. And that is something that was said in the documentary. I don't know if y'all remember that.
Yeah, that's sad because if you think about that stat right there, 1 out of 3 people, black males, are arrested. So you're talking over 30% there, right?
Yeah, that's over 30%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have those 1 out of 3, that percentage will probably end up increasing if we don't change, because that other
is.
60%, how would you feel if you know that? Those 60%. What are they going to be on their guard all the time? They're going to have to walk basically around with almost a mask on them. How would you feel if you're covered? Totally.
Well, honestly, personally, I feel more for the people. Okay, when we're talking about the 1 out of 3 people that are being arrested, obviously not all of them are good. Some of them are being arrested for a certain reason, but a big majority of the African American group that are being arrested are for very small reasons, and they're taken way out of proportion. For example, this woman was arrested for selling cocaine, and she got life in prison for that.
Okay. Let's go back to a history here. I believe, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but it either happened in the late 80s or early 90s. I think it was under Ronald Reagan. If you remember, in the documentary and the film, there was 5 or 6 black teenagers that were wrongly arrested because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time in a park in New York, claiming they raped a white woman. Well, that's when DNA first started coming out. They had to spend 6 years in prison. The DNA proved that they did not rape that woman. Isn't that sad? Just because of the color of their skin, the way they were dressed, they looked like they were in a group.
Yeah, and that's another perfect example of how the color of your skin plays a big role in how you're treated, specifically towards black people.
But I think we've made some good movements and good steps, and I thank God for DNA.
Yes.
I mean, we might say it that way, but think if they didn't have the DNA, those young black men would have served their whole life in prison.
Yes, there's been many cases of black people serving life in prison for either absolutely no reason, or it's just been taken out of proportion, and that just goes into play with overmass incarnation of this group of people. So I just want to talk about how this came about. So how did criminalization of black people come about? How do you guys think that came about in the first place?
Well, in the first place, are you talking about after slavery was abolished?
Yes, I'm talking about more after slavery was abolished, because we can say slavery was the main reason. Oh, since there was slavery, automatically we're going to think different of them. But I feel like there was other reasons.
Well, it's sad to say it was a little petty thefts, but we'll take it to another level. If it was right after when slavery was abolished, some of those crimes were actually made up on them. Did you know that? To form those prison camps.
Oh, yeah, of course.
To form those
Lots
prison
of-
camps.
Yes,
That's how,
lots of.
and I said, let's go back in history. If you take that away, then the black people might have been treated different moving forward.
And I think a lot of.
You put a label on somebody.
Yeah.
Once you
A
label.
label, that's what it is.
Yep, it's a label.
And I think a lot of this criminality was created, I'm talking after slavery, through the lie, like you said, the label or the lie of black people being violent. And I think violence is a big factor, especially black males being violent towards a white woman. And this was a whole lie created through films, like shown in the documentary, that kind of labeled black men as being violent, which ties into that criminality aspect.
Yeah, and the sad thing about those films is the old films that you're talking about,
Yeah, that were made up.
they took a white person, they made him look black with paint. You can still see the eyes, And like you said, he's chasing a white woman down the hill. That's what started pointing the black person as an animal, as a predator, which is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Once you label somebody as an animal and predator, then
It's hard to take that label off
Exactly.
even after several decades because of how big it was at that time. And also, white people created myths of black males being rapists too towards
Right.
white women in these films. And this created that label of criminality.
right.
But not just raping, violence in general, as well as thieving, etc. The list just goes on. So, as for the promise of equal justice, that was caused. Do you think the promise of equal justice caused crime to increase? Because I think that's something that we don't really think about.
Equal justice.
So the promise of equal justice, I'm talking more back then.
Okay.
Do you think that this caused crime to increase? Right? Because wouldn't it have
Yeah.
caused the racist white folks to be mad?
Right. Yeah. And crime increased. And like what I said is when you build upon that, and then you see the black people try to fill in as a normal life with the people on the street, they're still getting kicked around. There was no normality for them.
Mm-hmm. No normality.
No.
And even with civil rights movement, during that time, a lot of the politicians would say that this was the cause of crime increase.
Correct.
Which, correct, it was, but it wasn't the civil rights fault that crime was increasing. It was the people who were trying to make crime increase.
Right.
Right. So I think that that question is just, I feel like it's just a way to make it seem like civil rights was a big fault of crime increase, but it wasn't because,
And unfortunately, there was no equal rights back then.
oh no.
They
there was
they
no-
made a statement of equal rights to give a certain race more power.
Mhm.
And they saw that if a race has a domination and power, can you imagine how you would feel every day you walk out? And that is something that we need to overcome. And like I said, the only way that you're going to overcome moving forward now is have these different cultures move in with each other and learn to hang out, learn to associate with these people and see our differences. We all have differences.
Well, unfortunately, we have too many people in this world. Not everyone's going to get along. And I think by saying that statement, putting people in the same room to like hang out, some people aren't going to want to hang out. But I think by everyone having the same rights with no segregation and figuring out what people they want to surround themselves with, I think that's the best way
Right.
to integrate America. But there's never going to be a full country of everyone wanting to hang out.
And the
because-
problem throughout history, especially you're looking at Nixon's era, Reagan's era, the criminalization building up
The
onto
drug
the
war
black,
era.
the drug war area. You have a inconsistency with a leadership. You have Nixon, you have another dominant president that wants to overtake crack. I think it's a great idea. Definitely crack kills, but like you said, when you start
it was focused towards
focus on
African
just
American
one
people.
race. And let's look at a broader picture here. The drugs weren't brought in by the black race.
They
the
were
drugs
brought in by the white race.
No, not just the white race. The Colombian race, the races down south brought in a lot of those drugs too to filtrate. So it's not, you got to look at other races factor in.
Well,
this.
that's the point. The whole point of this drug war era was to have the African American group as the focal point, the main blame of this, so they can get arrested. And that's how incarnation rates were increasing. You see at the Nixon era, it was the incarnation rates were up there, and it was because of it was a way to trap the African American people, basically, by defining crack and powder to be different substances, although they should be the same thing.
Well, if you look at history during the Nixon era in the early 70s, you want to bring up history, cocaine, like you said, is a big money drug. The white powder is what first came in. A lot of your big powder dealers were big money Caucasians,
Yeah, of course.
and they were dealing to them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to point a blame game, you have the big dealer, big brother, you have a little brother dealing under him, right? Little brother might have been a black person, but big brother brought the money in to start the process.
Mm-hmm. The point is this whole drug war era that Nixon created the ideology of it.
Right.
That was created by him was simply a way just to arrest more African American people.
Yeah.
And that's what we see today. That's why a lot of people point towards African American groups as selling drugs because of that era.
Crack fueled the fire with Ronald Reagan. Crack is a quicker, maybe more aggressive drug, but like you said, they're both in the same class in cocaine. So Reagan took crack to another level to criminalize black people more, and you saw the increase.
Nixon and Reagan.
Yeah, but after
that.
Reagan, you saw what happened in the late 80s. I think it jumped to almost 800,000 African Americans in prison by the late 80s. And then it shot.
It really just got up there.
And I think Clinton in the 90s tried to help and clean up. He was more for equality and race. But at that time, with the police department, everything pointing the finger at somebody, it becomes out of control.
So as for the increasement, or as for criminalization on black people, I think we're still on that topic. Another factor was that on TV, criminals were shown as black people most of the time.
Right.
More than what was actually happening. You never really saw white people being arrested. It was really just black people being chased, arrested, checked. And this, you might not think that's a big deal, but it really is, because it really just adds to the flame of that criminalized identity, and it just makes everyone that's watching that automatically think black person criminal.
Right.
Which is just so, it feels so wrong to say, but that's
let's go back to the in the documentary, that's classifying a super predator.
Yeah.
You classify them as a super predator, which is wrong.
Which is not true.
And it's not true. I mean, that goes for any race. I mean, any race has bad people in it. If you want to talk about pedophiles, rapists, people breaking the stores, it happens throughout many races. Now, maybe in some states, certain color people do it more than other people, but how are we to judge? A lot of these media fabricates this stuff, explodes it.
Yeah, media
It's
fabricates this stuff as well.
Yep,
I agree with that. I didn't even think of that.
that's a good point.
But I think overall, just this film did a really good job on showing from all the way back to slavery to now on how criminalization is on black people, and how our mass incarnation rates are to blame on the arresting of mainly black people.
Yeah, and some of these black people are actually totally innocent.
No, yeah.
Some of them
That's-
are. Maybe,
yeah.
like you said, there's some petty crimes that they can be held in jail for a little while. They get, maybe, why are they being rehabilitated correctly? Are they being taught correctly
No.
to change? Maybe that's a flaw in our system. That needs to change. There's a lot of flaws. So maybe moving forward, like you, your classmates, other people get these type of documentaries out here, people will wake up more. And we keep moving forward for change.
And when I say that Black people are being arrested for no reason, and when you said that, obviously we aren't talking about every single person. People make crimes, people do bad stuff, people do get what they deserve as punishment, but we see that a lot of the blame and a lot of the biasism and a lot of the fingers pointed and there's a lot of identity crisis between the Black people.
And at another level, let's not just talk about the Black individual in a car right now. Let's talk about the Black individual walking by himself on the street. Those get called in for no reason. There's a Black person walking on the street. Next thing you know, they got a call.
I've heard a story of that.
Heard a story. It happens all over the place. There's a lot of stories on it, and it's sad. It's wrong. Why would you call a police officer on a human being walking down a street when you do not have a crime on him? You didn't see him do anything wrong just because of the way he looks.
And that just goes into play with that narrative of racial uncomfort.
Profiling.
The racial uncomfort continues. The racial profile continues into police brutality, into just people being judged on the street.
Yeah.
I said earlier that there's this kind of narrative today in modern America, because I know we talked about the past a lot of how this was brought about, of racial discomfort and this kind of fear that was brought upon towards Black people through the myths and lies on the films, right? And that narrative of this racial discomfort has really brought upon a lot of the police brutality, I think. So now that we've kind of discussed the main points of the film and we've kind of put forward our opinions, what do you think, how do you think we can move on from this, basically?
I think this is a deeply rooted issue worldwide. Just like Rome was not built in one day. So it will take a lot of effort to move forward. So first of all, I think education is the key. You know, we'll have to educate our population. I mean, just like you said, socioeconomic profiling, racial profiling, that goes with what kind of cars you drive, what kind of clothing you are in, and what color you are in. So all of that will take some time to educate, right? And also education is the key, so that can start from family, because kids were born into family. So the first 5 years definitely happened in a family. So we're gonna start with that, and then moving on to school system, which I think nowadays they're doing a great job in diversity, okay?
Diversity is definitely getting better in the workforce, school, but as for the criminality aspect of it, which is the main topic of this, unfortunately it's not very diverse, because we really just see one race in particular.
Yes, and that does take time. So in the last 20, 30 years, I think people were talking about this topic, yet I don't think there were a lot of changes made. Talking is one thing, doing is another. But I think the last 10 years, because of new generation, I think people definitely have recognized the deviation, okay, from what was claimed and what has been done. So, and also with a lot of racial interactions, just like you have a lot of friends in community and at school, you know, from all over the place, and you have learned from them as well, you know. And I think people definitely recognize how important it is to tolerate the racial differences, to recognize the racial differences, and to embrace the differences. And I think that has a lot to do with individual personalities, their education level, and their upbringing. It's like monkey see, monkey do. If your family does not embrace, it's going to be hard for you to do this alone. So I think this is the overall unroot from the system, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of acknowledgement, effort, to do this, and it's not going to be changed overnight. This is going to be from generation to generation, but I do believe if we start now, we are going to see the harvest sooner than just sit around and talk about it and not doing anything.
And I like how you said generation to generation. So for a while now, we've been saying we've realized that racism is still a thing, even after 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, but we still see a form of racism in each generation. First, it was just direct racism, lots of violence. Then we saw segregation. Then we saw the drug war bringing into a lot of criminality, which is racism in a way, because we're trying to kind of point fingers to a group without directly pointing fingers to a group. And I think this is relying on the inheritance of slavery. So as for what you said on patience, I think that there's not going to be an end to this, because there's too many people in this world, and unfortunately there's always going to be bad seeds. No one's ever going to fully come to an agreement, but I think that as a country we can try and make peace with what's happening and try our best to move forward from it. And this film did a great job showing what's happening, and it really was honestly sad to watch.
Yeah, and the only thing that I want to add to this whole thing is that when I talk about education, it's not just the education on the thought process, but also the real education on, the system. Meaning, a lot of these kids that we're talking about, they're underprivileged. So when they come from a community that's underprivileged, it's really hard for them to learn the right things, to do the right things, to say the right words. So when they behave differently from the general populations, so what is your first thought? You fear for your safety. You look at how they wear, what they drive, or how they act. You start to think, wow, is that safe? You start profiling people. So I think this is kind of like a vicious cycle. So if we do not work on the root cause analysis, meaning we need to educate these people, give them job opportunities, give them the environment that the other races are given, we're not going to see the end to it. And I don't believe there's a true end to it, but there's a lot of room for improvement. Any improvement is great. And not just in America, I'm talking about the whole world as well.
And when I said I don't believe there's a true end to it earlier, I know that sounded very negative and very when I said that, I mean, in America, there's millions of people. There's always going to be that group of racist people.
And that's part of
to
bias
say that,
and prejudice.
To say that, it's very, again, very negative, and I'm not trying to think negatively, but there's always going to be racist people and people who have different opinions and people who believe certain things, but I feel that more of us are coming to an agreement of what's still happening, of where these roots came from, and of how we are still finding loopholes in our rights, and how our rights aren't being taken advantage of fully because the government is still finding ways to have power over these groups of people. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say about my point of view on this documentary. But I just really hope that, honestly, I hope other people are able to see this documentary, because it really gave me a lot of insight on what's happening on not just the whole spectrum of racism, but just criminality. And I just didn't really even think about the criminal side of it, and how so many people are being imprisoned based off of that kind of root of slavery in a way.
Yeah, I think it's a very informative documentary. Highly recommend to everyone. And I think there's a lot of work to be done still.
A lot of work to be done in our criminal justice system in the government and also just in our world, not in regards to so I believe I've said everything that I feel in regards to this film and what I feel this film was trying to portray, and I just want to say thank you guys for discussing this with me, because it's important to hear other people's insights.
Thank you for introducing this documentary to us as well.
Yes, thank you for introducing this, and there's a lot of good information, and hopefully we'll move forward to some changes.
Hopefully.